The financial crisis begins in January. Hey, everybody, you're watching Bull, Boom, Bear, Bust. I must put on my blue blockers. My eyes been bothering me a little bit here. So let's talk about this. It's not me making this prediction. Let's look at this article here. This is out of Fortune, and this is talking about Bond King. That's what they're calling him here, the Bond King, Jeffrey Gundlach. Let's go ahead and bring this up here. Let's start right here. This is a Fortune magazine article put out by Yahoo. Bond King Jeffrey Gundlach warns higher for longer interest rates could trigger the next financial crisis. So we see a lot of this where people will come out and make predictions, and that way when it finally happens, they could say, see, I told you so. Many of these people, including Jeffrey here, have been making this prediction for a long time. Now, I've always said here, I try not to put timelines on certain things. When it comes to a financial crisis, it could happen any day. As soon as the life support gets pulled out of this economy and out of this banking system, that's when it all comes down. Does anyone know when someone's going to pull the plug on this? I don't think so. So we just have to sit here and guess and prepare the best we can. And I'll give you an example. Right now, there's life support happening for U.S. banks. Banks are being bailed out right now as we speak, but they're not telling you about it. But they kind of are. All right, let me explain. So they're calling it the Emergency Lending Program. All right. And it's been going on since March, ever since we saw that string of bank failures. All right. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit here later in this video. But let's get back to this prediction here by Bond King Jeffrey Gundlach. Now, as we go down into this article, first of all, I have to point something out. Did anyone catch this in this article? First paragraph. This is Fortune magazine, by the way. First paragraph, Bong, B-O-N-G, Bong King, Jeffrey Gundlach. All right, I thought I had a spelling problem. Or maybe Jeffrey Gundlach took up a new hobby and started, doing the wacky weed, as they call it. Gundlach, closing bell interview, he said, and he has a net worth of $2.2 billion, by the way. That makes him someone that we should listen to, right? But I can go back to 2022 articles, 2021 articles, where he was pretty much predicting the same thing. Again, nobody knows exactly the timeline here because you can't predict when the rescue programs will end. If the Fed ends these programs tomorrow, the emergency lending program, the banks will implode. Do I think they're going to do that on purpose? No, I don't think so. But here's what he said, and he's talking about the higher for longer interest rate forecast. Quote, higher for longer means we have a massive interest expense problem in this country that is going to be, I believe, the next financial crisis. And it goes on to here to talk about the interest that we're paying here. According to the Cato Institute, interest payments doubled between 2015 and this year, with the government set to pay, get this, folks, $640 billion in interest this year. $640 billion, over $500 billion just in interest this year. And this will become the government's biggest expense by 2051, bigger than defense spending, bigger than social programs. Pretty amazing. So is he right? Will we see the inevitable collapse here very soon? And recently, we also had JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon out there selling 1 million shares of his bank's stock. And that was pretty much I think a warning alarm for a lot of people. Now, also in another interview, Jeffrey Gundlach went on to say, quote, all signs point to a recession that'll cost Americans their jobs. He says, quote, layoffs are coming. That's another article. This one's out of Business Insider. Now, let's discuss timelines and let's be more specific here by bringing up a chart here of the funds rate. And this goes all the way back to 2005. And we can see the Great Financial Crisis, the GFC, the rate was about where it's at today. If you look to the right side of this chart here, we go back to the financial crisis 2006, and we see the rate's about where it was back then. But look what happened back then. Back then, it was kept elevated, or remained elevated for, it looks like about a year, close to a year. It looks like maybe closer to 8 months, 8 to 10 months. Anyways, you saw what happened after the rate remained high for that long. Now we're that high right now, but we haven't been there for that long. It's only until 2 meetings ago that we were pushed up to this. 3 meetings ago now, because the last 2 meetings they didn't change the rate; they kept the pause going. But if you go back to the 3 meetings ago, we entered this territory of 5.25 to 5.5% on the funds rate. But how long will it have to stay there before the next crisis hits? With the debt being so much higher today than it was back in 2006, the last time they kept rates higher for longer, I think it's going to be much faster this time because the debt is so much bigger. $1 trillion in consumer credit card debt alone. And then you look at every other type of debt, and it's above, and in some cases almost double what it was during the financial crisis or before the financial crisis hit. Remember, after the financial crisis ensued, we saw debt drop because people gave the keys back to their homes, their cars, and debt actually dropped. Even though there was tremendous job losses, debt still ended up dropping. Also, because banks pulled back on lending because they were very scared at the very beginning of that financial crisis. Debt dropped because people couldn't borrow money as easily. Of course, after the banks were all rescued, then the lending frenzy ensued, and therefore we've seen this bull market with rising asset prices now for over 10 years. But at the beginning of the crisis, banks were very, very reluctant to loan out money because at that time they did not know that they were going to be rescued. So as far as timelines go, take a look at this chart again and look back at 2006 through 2007 here and see how long that took with the higher rates, with the way debt was back then, or how much debt was around back then. And then look at today, how much longer is it going to take, or will it not take very long at all now that we're at this level, right? Interesting chart nonetheless. Now let's move on here. Another Gunlick interview. This was a interview over at Closing Bell CNBC. Gunlick was quoted, "Rates should fall as we move into recession in early 2024. Well, how early into 2024 is early? Is he talking January? Is he talking February? To most people, early in the year means the first 4 months. To other people, their opinion is no, early means January, February. What does he mean by early? Well, in the first 4 months, you'd have to say at the longest, that would be early in the year. So is he correct, or is he just doing like he's done in the past and just putting things out there? That way, when if the crisis happens, then he can say, "See, I told you so." So what do you think about this? Is there any relevance to his timelines talking about early 2024 and the things that he said earlier in these other articles and interviews that he put out there? Now, we'll go to an audio clip here in a minute, but I want us to think back to a few weeks ago when I did a report looking at the yield curve and how recessions didn't occur when the yield curve inverted, but when the yield curve became uninverted. In other words, when the Fed finally raised rates and caused the yield curve to uninvert, that's when a financial crisis usually kicks in. And we're at that point now where the curve is beginning to uninvert. Now, we saw the 10-year bond yield get pushed back down. I think that was central bank buying. We saw that happen here in the last couple of days. But it's been bobbing into uninverted territory. And listen to what, again, Bond King or Bong King, Jeffrey Gunlick. Let's listen to what he had to say here in a recent interview here.
There's a good probability that in December, when we get dot plots, I have a feeling they're not going to be as aggressive as the current dot plot. And I also think that the shape of the yield curve is extremely unstable at this point in time. We have an absolute flat as a pancake yield curve. We had that inverted yield curve of 108 basis points, 2s to 10s. That's basically completely gone. This is the classic action that one gets prior to recessions. You get a yield curve that inverts, and people talk a lot about it, and like it's very inverted, but it hangs out there for a long time. One point that I've been trying to mentor the young people in the investment business
Remember the chart that we just looked at? It hangs out there for a long time. The Fed funds rate back in the financial crisis hung out there for close to a year at that high level.
Business is everything takes much longer than you think it's going to. The yield curve inverts, and everybody says, oh, we're on recession watch. No, you're not. It has to be inverted for like a year and a half, but that's already happened. And then it has to de-invert, and that has now happened.
The de-inversion, it happened, and it's been bobbing in and out of de-inverted territory.
We also have the unemployment rate. While low, it is now noticeably trending higher, and it's above its 12-month moving average, and it's about to go above its 3-year moving average in the first half of next year. That's very recessionary. We also have consumer confidence. And
another timeline. Did you hear what he said? The first half of next year. Will he be correct?
That has started to deteriorate in terms of people's view of the present, and that's starting to close the gap between the always cautious view of the future and the view of the present. These are very recessionary signals. And so I really believe that layoffs are coming. I think we've seen hours come down, we've seen hiring freezes, and now we're starting to see layoff announcements, not en masse, and not but they're out there in financial firms and technology firms, and I believe that's going to spread. Mm-hmm. So I really believe that we're going to get this bond rally. I think the short end is going to come down, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later, because we can't afford this government that we're running at today's interest rate level.
So now let's shift gears a little bit here to the bank bailouts that are currently happening, but we're not allowed to call them bailouts. Remember, it's an emergency lending program. We're going to show you what's happening here just recently in the last few days with that bailout. And that's what I call it, a bailout, because that's what it is. They don't want us to call it that, but that's really what it is. It's a rescue program, bailout, many different names you can put on it. First, let's go back to this article that came out just around the time the banks started failing back in March of this year. Then we're going to fast forward to current times here. This is out of the Board of Governors, the Fed here. And it says here, Fed Reserve Board announces it will make available additional funding to eligible depository institutions to help assure banks have the ability to meet the needs of all their depositors. Now, you would have thought that this was something short term, just to get the banks through that time of dire need, where the banks were actually failing or getting taken over, taken over. But take a look here at this. Here is a recent chart of this emergency lending program, and we see on the bottom left-hand corner here, and it began in about March. And we want to go up here to the top in the upper right here, and we see are actually increasing this program. So not only was it not temporary, if you look all the way to the right side of the chart here, you'll see that the emergency lending, quote, bailout, quote, rescue package is getting bigger and bigger. All right, so what does this mean? Well, this means the banks are in big trouble, folks. Now, to me, one of the really interesting things is that we have a lot of people out there that still think that nothing's wrong, everything's fine. They have no idea that these things are even happening because they don't talk about it on CNBC or on the other business networks. The financial segment of your local news channels not talking about this. Banks are being rescued right now with the emergency lending program. If the banks weren't in trouble, why is this happening, and why is it bigger now than what it was back in March when we saw a string of banks fail? Maybe you could let me know the answer to that down in comments. What do you think about this? All right, people, so I'd like to hear from you down in comments on this one. What do you think about Jeffrey Gundlach's timeline? Is early 2024 a definite? Is it going to be before that? And remember that chart at how high interest rates can only last so long when you have a lot of debt in the economy. How much longer are we talking about? Please let me know down in comments. Also, quick note here before we wrap it up. A viewer said, will I do a report without my hat? I guess I wear my hat all the time, don't I? Well, it's pretty interesting because when I don't wear my hat out and about, when I'm just out doing stuff, I never get recognized. But when I wear my hat, I've gotten recognized several times because I always have my hat on, don't I? So if I get to 100,000 subscribers, I will do a report, maybe several reports without a hat. And somebody presented that challenge. My thing is, my channel stopped growing. So I don't know if I'll ever get there. Anyways, like and subscribe. Get me to 100,000. I will take this hat off and I'll do a report. Thanks everybody for watching. Keep stacking, y'all. Bye now. Peace.